Matthew's gospel knows little compromise. Sheep or goats, wheat or weeds, good or evil. Finding the good news of God's love for all people, for all creation, can really be a challenge in this book. And today's gospel is no exception. Jesus interprets a parable for the disciples. He announces that all evildoers will be thrown into the furnace of fire, while the righteous will shine like the sun. The Son of Man will judge the world. Matthew's phrase, "for the kingdom of heaven may be compared to," occurs here for the first time in Matthew's gospel. We will hear it again and again in the coming weeks. And Jesus' parable is a genuine metaphor, best viewed as a whole, with no point-by-point comparison. And the kingdom of believers then, and we who follow Jesus today, have the same opportunity as the rest of those out in the world to do good and to do evil. Of course, Jesus encourages us to do good, to strive for righteousness. Because when we hear this story, and we hear all of the stories on television and in the newspapers today, those worldly stories tend to move us immediately to judge, fearful of our fate today and in the days to come. We judge the fakeness of news and political leaders. We judge the fairness of healthcare proposals and programs for the poor. We judge the fate of those seeking pardon or parole. Jesus' parable, though, redirects our fate and our fears, emphasizing that God alone is the judge. You see, Jesus gets our paradoxical nature as saint and sinner. You see, we're wired with the freedom to do good as well as evil. And when we experience the evil of the world and those evil folk in the world, we look beyond the log in our own eyes that blocks the things that we have done and the things that we have left undone. And we judge. We sit God-like and we serve as judge and jury. We do this when we hear the news of the day. We do this when we read triumphal tweets that tear down. We do this when we try and navigate a purple world that wants simply to see everything as either blue or red. We, as both saints and sinners, are free to choose good or evil. We have a tendency, though, to see ourselves as right and everyone else as wrong. We consider ourselves close and connected with God and everyone else as lost, wandering, in need of correction. We choose to let fear and those who feed its flames influence us and separate us from the kingdom of God. Separate us with walls of hate and smoke screens of superiority. We worry and we wonder about evil. We worry and we wonder where God is. And we, with creation, wait with eager longing for redemption and revelation. We wait subjected by the empire of empty evil in the world. We wait to be set free from our bondage to fear and the decay and death that accompany it. And it begs that age-old, fear-filled question, why is there evil in the world? And how, in this parable story that Jesus tells of the wheat and the weeds, what is the good word for us this day? Why is there evil in the world, and how do we address it? Jesus says simply that wheat and weeds grow together until the harvest, until the time is right. we want to know, what about those weeds? What about that evil? What about those things that bother and give us fear, that keep us up at night? And those weeds that grow everywhere, those weeds in my garden, those weeds in Washington, D.C., those weeds in our hearts and in our minds. Wheat and weeds, good and evil, saints and sinners. Notice that this Jesus story isn't called the wheat or the weeds. It's the wheat and the weeds. Because the reality is, in this world and in each one of us, it's not either or, but both and. Returning from our week of rest and renewal, we came back the middle of this week to find our vegetable garden bursting, groaning with labor pains, as Paul says, full of those beautiful things that we planted and full of weeds. Full of weeds that rooted and wrapped themselves into our little corner of creation. And as I bent to pick and to pull, I was struck by one particularly prolific weed. Portulaca oleracea, commonly called purslane. It was everywhere. This stuff was everywhere. It was throughout our garden, and it rings our baptismal font this very morning. Now, the definition of a weed is subjective. It's completely based on our judgment. If we like the plant and where it's growing, everything is fine. If we like that it's pretty easy to move and to remove when we don't like it, it's okay. You see, plants are judged to weed status if they compete with the view and the plants that we like, that we favor, that we choose, that we judge. An example of this was earlier this spring. We have a sandy and rocky, shady backyard that is kind of green, but very little grass grows there. And this spring, lamb's ear popped up all over the place. We were thrilled. Kay's best friend Julie hates the stuff and is constantly pulling it as weeds out of her garden. But I love lamb's ear, soft and silvery, furry leaves that the deer won't eat. So we carefully dug it up and placed it in a circle in the corner of one of our perennial beds. We watered, we fed it, we watched. They didn't grow. They stayed the same size until spindly little stems grew up and tiny little flowers bloomed, and we realized that this was not lamb's ear but Indian paintbrush. Weeds to some and beautiful wildflowers to others. But what about that darn purslane in my garden? Popping up even as we sit here this morning. It's an interesting plant. It's an annual weed. It has oval, succulent-type leaves and reddish stems. You'll recognize it when you come up to the font. It grows flat on the ground from a single taproot, and it forms a mat across the soil. It's drought-resistant and can grow anywhere from a gravel driveway to a freshly tilled garden bed. It has small yellow flowers that come out about 3 weeks after it grows in the spring. It makes me wonder, wheat or weed? Produce or pest? Good or evil? You see, purslane is like each of us. It's both and. It's versatile. You can eat this stuff. You can eat it pickled or chopped in a Middle Eastern or green salad. I had it the first time when I was on business in Crete. Goes really well with lamb. You could put it in tacos or in your potato or cucumber salad. It's hearty in a stew because its succulent leaves thicken the broth. And you can eat it just plain right off of the stem. Its delicious leaves are crunchy with a tangy lemon peppery flavor. And you can harvest it all throughout the summer. You can forage it as I did this morning from my garden, and increasingly you might see it pop up in your CSA shares or find it at a farmer's market. It's been consumed since ancient times because it grows easily in hot and not too dry climates, popular in Middle Eastern and Mexican and African cuisines. And it is a nutritional powerhouse, offering remarkable amounts of calcium, iron, magnesium, and potassium, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins A, B, and C, and plenty of antioxidants. It's an important part of the Middle Eastern and Mediterranean high life expectancy diet. And author Michael Pollan cites it as one of the 2 most nutritious plants on the entire planet in his book, In Defense of Food. So I ask, wheat or weed, produce or pest, good or evil? I don't know, I see weeds as pretty evil. They can be horrible for my garden. And weedy people proclaim, pursue, and promote evil in our world. But when we seek retribution instead of justice, when we rush to pull out plants or to persecute people, we may perpetuate evil and push everything, and us included, into the fires of fear. This morning, through this story, Jesus says, see through the smoke screens. Give time. Experience growth and grace. Let God sort it out. We do need to resist evil, clearly, and we need to protect those in need. We're not to put our heads into the ground or completely ignore the weeds in our lives, in Washington, or in ourselves. We're not to compromise or fall into the evil that trips and traps. Beloveds, wheat or weeds, produce or pests, good or evil, the freedom is yours. We're called to wait and work, as Paul says, longing for the day when all of creation will be set free from bondage and suffering, set free from fear and evil within us and around us in our world this day. And having both wheat and weeds within and around us, we humbly place our hope in the promises of God. One of those places is the font that this weed encircles. Another one of these places is this table, the Lord's table of redemption and revelation, from where we eat the bread of heaven and we drink the cup of salvation. Beloveds, the bread of heaven is made from wheat. The cup of salvation is made from grapes and yeast, a weed. Heaven and salvation, wheat and weeds, produce or pest, good or evil. Saints and sinners, Jesus and Paul in our readings this day urges us to go forth and to bear the fruits of justice and mercy, to live into the freedom that Jesus gives to us this day and every day. Let anyone with ears listen.